Octopus Cat. I'm slowly and painfully reading this out loud. Long Voyage Back, 1983, written by Rheinhart. I have no rights to this, but if he's around, or his family's around, or his publisher's around and they want to stick ads on these, that's fine. The book is an absolute classic. I still think the best book I've read in the post-apocalyptic nuclear war, Cold War fiction genre is probably Alas Babylon. As this present moment in time, that's where I'm up to. That's what I think is the best. This is very close to that. It's an excellent book, and we are currently, those diehards on the channel that are listening along, we're currently on page 291. So what I'm doing about every 10 episodes, so I do weekly episodes on Friday, is I'm actually discussing it, the bits that I've read. So this is a discussion from page 225 to 291. Rheinhart has an advantage on most prepper fiction authors because he's actually a writer, and he wrote this at the height of the Cold War in 1983 because the real height of it was the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 61. Probably got that wrong, probably 62, 63. Not that old. And then the next big height was 1984, where we came very, very close to a nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States and NATO. And thankfully we never did. And what he's doing in the book is envisaging what would happen if there was an all-out nuclear war. And there's a couple of twists in it still to come, so stay with me. The part we're about to hit and are hitting now is the St. Thomas section. And it's not my favourite section. When I first read it, I really did not like that section, but having reread it now to speak it out loud for you guys, it actually has some good points in it that I had kind of overlooked, because I think it's more about the psychological adaptation to the nuclear holocaust rather than what the previous parts of the book have been, which is survive, try to thrive, physical adaptation, and political in a way with the small group on the boat, the Vagabond. This section started with like a whole tumult of extra stuff starting to happen. They're trying to say whether they need to flee to the Caribbean islands or to South America. And they end up making the decision to go to the Caribbean islands because they're hearing on their shortwave radio, which they have. They're very, very ill prepared for this bug out by boat, by the way. But they do have a shortwave radio, and they know that most of the South American countries are interning United States citizens, white people, in internment camps, and with food running out, that's probably going to end up in death, and horrible death at that. And I kind of wondered, do you think that's going to happen if we have a nuclear exchange between Russia and China, or between America and China and Russia? Do you think the rest of the world that doesn't actually get hit by the nukes, do you think they would look upon people who are from the white race as the enemy? Do you think they would blame us for destroying their world? I think there's some cause for that, there's some possibility of that, but I think it's overblown. I think it's partially due to the time of segregation still being there, though being dismantled in the United States. So I think the fear of the black was still very much part of the fear of the nuclear Russian. And I'm not altogether sure that would happen. I think people are mostly going to be treated well whilst they can do stuff. But when little localized areas don't have the food and the water resources to actually look after people, they will throw out visitors. And the visitor might have had a cottage in that area for 20 years and gone every summer and fished on that lake. But in the local area, once things get very crucial and very difficult, outsiders will be nominated and outsiders will be forcibly evicted. I think that's pretty obvious. I'm not sure whether they would bother to put people in internment camps. That causes a lot of effort and work, and I'm not sure that would happen. But it's happened before in war, that's for sure. Although not identified, there is a plague coming out of the western United States that's killing about 50% of the people in 5 to 6 days, and it's spreading both to South America, which again is putting them off South America, and some of the islands of the Caribbean, which is again pointing them to bug out to the Caribbean. Also, some of the Caribbean islands are American de facto colonies, so that's also part of why they decide to go to the Caribbean. But it's not stated that I think this plague is obviously a human-made plague, and it's been liberated by the nuclear war falling, and it's from a lab probably in the West United States. I think it's a little too soon in the nuclear holocaust for an organic, natural plague to start up on this virulence. Anything that kills 50% of the host is probably human-made. Not necessarily, but I think it's far too soon. So I think it's a biological weapon. So I think that's something that I haven't really considered. Other than pandemic, I haven't really thought about the fact that in an all-out nuclear war, there is likely to possibly be biochemical weapons released, viruses and bacteria released from weapons labs. Hopefully they would get hit by the nuclear weapons and would be absolutely fried, but there's a good percentage chance that even labs that are for good reasons, not to kill people, that they might actually lose containment because of loss of power and damage. And so there is a good chance there might be several flus, plagues, diseases floating around within weeks of a nuclear war of this description. So, I mean, I'm not planning myself to be travelling around in a boat around the Caribbean, meeting different people. What I plan to do is spend 90 days underground and protect myself. But I think it's something I need to be thinking about, is the lookout and possibility of a plague coming very soon after a nuclear war that's very violent and very killing is probably something I should have took on board, and I haven't really to this point, but as an intellectual exercise I'm now going to. So one of the other things to do is the mention that South America has shot down a Canadian 747, killing everybody on board because it tried to land in South America after fleeing from Toronto, Canada. So obviously I live very close to Toronto, so maybe me and Kitty would be on board that plane. So that made me think, in an all-out nuclear war situation of absolute devastation, these guys obviously flee by boat to the Caribbean in the first phase. They will flee further, I will spoil that for you. It's not going to end in the Caribbean. So if there was a nuclear war, would you flee? And I think most of us would have a bug out location, most of us would have a home, we might have some friends in the area, but certainly large amounts of nuclear radiation, you might, if you have the opportunity to flee. This is where I think silver and gold precious metals prepping actually would come into place. I think the ability to give people $5,000 to $20,000 a person of gold, bullion, coins, whatever, might just get you robbed and killed, might get you on a plane or a boat out of absolute death. So that's the only place I think. I don't believe there will be a system of economy with gold and silver and people will be rich because they have gold and silver and they can just trade it for whatever they want. I think people are going to trade for basic stuff: food, water, ammunition, women, drugs, maybe, alcohol. I don't think after an all-out global society collapse people are going to trade particularly for gold and precious metals. Though if it's a short-term event you might want to, because things will come back. So would you get on a plane, and where would you flee to, and what reception would you get when you get there? I think that's something we don't really conceptualize. A lot of people think, well, I'm going to bug out to X, Y and Z, but in an all-out event, an all-out nuclear war or a massive asteroid strike or a massive volcanic eruption, something that's just catastrophic, are you going to be received well? Are you going to be received in the area you're going to? Are you going to be left alone in the area you're going to? Are you going to be able to access resources in that area? Because pretty much everywhere on the world, including the Antarctic, already has people there. So if you're actually going to bug out to somewhere, you're going to be the outsider. So I think that's something you need to be considering. It's certainly something we've considered, which is why we're bugging out on retirement. And half of that group is already bugged out to the bug out location, and that's where they're living. Because if you're not part of that community, it's going to be very, very difficult to get yourself safely inserted into the community after a massive event. Now I know a lot of you are fundamentalist Christians and Catholics and stuff like that, and I know that from the bad reception my channel sticker condoms got. But a lot of you have kids, and at what age are you going to let them have sex? I think this is an important point. Unprotected sex results in several things: pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases. If you have young females and males, I would consider it a parental right and duty as a prepper to make sure you have adequate contraceptive devices and pills, if possible, available. You don't want your girl child at the age of 12 or 13 estranged from you and then going into a reproductive cycle that they had in Quebec in the 1700s, where they have like an average of 14 children and die very early on in life because all they're doing is literally breeding, breeding, breeding. Although that would repopulate the world, I don't think we need to do it like that, and I think it would be a shame if parents dropped the ball because of religious beliefs on protecting their children from having a life of misery. Barefoot and pregnant ain't no way to be, certainly not in the Holocaust. But again, I understand that people have religious beliefs that they can't get over, and because they believe they've been instructed personally by God to act in a certain way, whereas in fact God would never act that way. Now the part with the wind song's interesting because they come across the boat that's been raped and attacked by pirates, and pirates is a big theme all the way through the book. I think it's just to give it dramatic action, to be honest. I don't think piracy is going to be that big a deal outside of some area. I don't think people are cruising up and down looking for boats this early on after the nuclear war. I think people are going to be scared stiff. Maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, the wife and the daughter have been raped and they're almost dying of radiation poisoning, and the husband's dying as well. And Neil switches into normal mode. They've already discussed this. The boat's wrecked. Search it, take what we need, leave, right? And what they do is they actually bring them on board at risk to themselves, and they give them nursing care, basic nursing care, and let them die with what degree of dignity they can. They help out others. And the unsaid reason for that is because they felt that they could have been the wind song. The vagabond could have been attacked and treated that way as well, so they wanted to give some human dignity to it. And I think that's an important aspect. If it's not going to cost you too much safety or supplies, try not to be brutal, military, aggressive. Karma is a real thing, whether you believe in a God or not. But to actually give people human kindness at the end of the normal world, I think it's an important thing. I think it's something we need to more as a group of preppers take on board. This whole aspect of holding up at the bug out location and executing any libtards that come out of the city looking for food, although it has some basis in reality, right? Depends on the situation. I do think we should spend a little bit more focus and effort as a group on YouTube talking about ways that we can safely and reasonably help other people out if we can in the event of SHTF. I think it's kind of a human desire to help, and I think by actually acknowledging that, we might actually prevent ourselves from doing it in ways that endanger us. Now I couldn't help but think of Mosaic Master when Puerto Rico got nuked quite long after the war. I think that's pretty reasonable. I think in a sudden non-build-up nuclear war where one side just fires for whatever reason, and then the other side responds, and then both sides are basically destroyed and most of the rest of the world's going to be destroyed. There will be nuclear submarines and even land-based systems and possibly space-based systems that may not actually be used in the first phase. In fact, it's very likely that the enemy would want to get, and the Americans, and would want to get data and information to find out secondary targets of more value. Certainly in all that exchange, I think it was very reasonable that Puerto Rico's naval base was actually targeted quite some time afterwards. And I think that's something we should be thinking about as well. Once the birds have stopped flying and the bombs have stopped going off and we've managed to bury ourselves underground, if you're able to and you've survived, don't assume that 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week, 5 week, or even 6 weeks later that there may not be secondary nuclear explosions on your land and in your area. And this goes back to the EMP. The most likely EMP would be, in my opinion, from nuclear war. In the event of a nuclear war, you should have Faraday caged small amounts of electronic material like solar flashlights, radios, Geiger counters even. Geiger counters. Don't get them out straight away. If you protect yourself to the max, which I would do, and I try and do that for 90 days, you don't actually need this. If your protection's not adequate, you're going to find out because you're going to get really sick. But if you have that available after the 90 days or the 30 days or the 14 days, whatever the period is, if it's 14 days and you come up and you're using your Geiger counter and the secondary EMP is set off to take out secondary communications devices that the United States or Canada may be deploying by Russia or China, or I guess aliens, you've now lost your Geiger counter. So try to really limit getting electronic devices out of Faraday cages until at least 28 days, at least until you feel reasonably sure there's not going to be a further EMP bomb. So land doesn't really find safety for Neil, though some of them think it is safe. The American government in the Virgin Islands is still paying people by cash, paper money, which is kind of amusing because these days it's all electronic, and certainly in this happening in 2019 it's going to be very much more dire than in 1983. There will be no electronic payment, people will not be being paid. I think a lot of people in small areas like the Virgin Islands and even in big city areas, depending on what's going on locally, will actually go to work anyway and work for free. I think there'll be a spirit of we need to help each other, and people will do that, and that spirit will last for quite some time. Once the food or the water runs out, that spirit will disappear entirely. The idea that humanity will dissolve into this beast and start raping and killing and pillaging on day one of SACF is utter nonsense. Certainly if you live in a very, very high crime area where people don't know their neighbours and don't like and trust their neighbours, you might see, well, you probably will see some looting and crime almost immediately, but the vast majority of places will see normalcy for a surprisingly long time. And one of the things you need to do as a prepper is appreciate that normalcy is a protective brief period before the mass die-off or the mass migration of the people around you has to occur. Use that time to protect yourself in whichever ways you can. Try to protect your community and your family as well if you can. You know, if you can help ration and make people more aware of the fact that once the toilet paper's gone, it's gone forever, at least for your natural life. That's a good idea what you can do as a prepper. So certainly in 2019, pretty much everywhere on the planet has far more people than food and water can be produced locally. This varies, of course. I have more water here than we could use, but for most areas of the world, you will run out of water, you will run out of food by the population size, unless the population has been killed by plague or the nuclear attack itself, and the vast majority of the population will not be killed like that conveniently. The vast majority of the population will be in place, and then we'll have to go through dying or surviving, and mostly it will be dying. Without technology, without complexity, without gasoline, without trade, we cannot feed more than is estimated 500 million to 1 billion people on the planet. That's assuming the planet hasn't been damaged by radiation and plague. It will have been. That's a really considerable number of people going to die. Or move, let's be nice about this, maybe they can move to California and eat avocados and work for Uncle Al. But there's no question here, if society falls for whatever cause, certainly from nuclear war, but from whatever cause, there will be billions will die in the first year. Billions of people. Like, it's unbelievable how many people will die. And I think we need to take that on board and be aware of that. Whatever safety we have to grab and use. Now, the other thing from this book is that the children, the young teens in St. Thomas, black and white and Asian, actually get together and have no barriers in race and actually blame their parents for the nuclear war and subsist by basically turning into a form of a hippie. And that, I think, is an interesting one as well. Children will adapt way better than we think. Certainly online, when people are storing up colouring books and electronic pads for their children to use in SACF so they don't get bored, they're missing the plot. They're seeing things in plenty. And maybe they have stored enough and then we'll have plenty. Work to do. One of the major problems with this book in that position. Hang on a minute. We've been on the US mainland in the book early on, and it wasn't exactly paradise Earth. There's a lot of radiation and it's spreading. Certainly the eastern coast and most of the western coast, and certainly the central Midwest, where the bombs will have fallen and then the radiation clouds have spread. How much foraging is available in July after an all-out nuclear war in the United States? I'm arguing here with the book author. I think mass starvation and die-off is happening within a week to 2 weeks maximum of an all-out nuclear war. I'm not talking about 50 bombs falling. I'm talking about, 300, 400, 500 bombs have hit the US and Canadian mainland, and probably Mexico as well. So I'm arguing, again, in this situation, if your principal ways of feeding you and your family long term is hunting, trapping and fishing and foraging for dandelions, you might want to reconsider. Radiation poisoning will be a thing, and the amounts available will be under high stress from the human population that's going to really try and grab and eat everything it can. This will be a scenario where people will eat bark, probably incorrectly, so learn how you eat bark. It's actually good, but people will eat the outsides of the bark, they will eat the leaves, they will eat grass, they will eat every animal, every pet. They will swap children and eat them. In serious starvation, cannibalism is a mode of survival that about 50% of human beings will do and can do. The other 50% won't, and they just die. And then they get eaten. Try not to put yourself in a situation where cannibalism is the only option that you and your family have. It's not healthy. So I hope you enjoyed that. So the book ends that I'm reading, this part of it, with them having an open discussion about becoming pirates. They have to get enough food and water to get out of the Virgin Islands and head further south, in Neil's opinion. He hasn't really discussed this with anybody, so he's again doing the I'm the leader, I'm planning and responsible for everybody. He's not bringing people into the mix. He's ignoring large amounts of his crew, including Macklin and Tony. That, as we will see, is probably not smart of Neil. He should have made them part of his crew. And they need guns and ammunition because they know there's pirates on pretty much every island now. I think that's realistic. If you get close to a port and people have boats and oil and fuel, they will come out and see what's on your boat and try and take it if they can, if it's safe to do so. So they're going to become pirates. So now they have an operational target. They have two targets, and they're going to decide which of the two targets to hit, and it's probably going to be the boat they're going to hit. So the book's now going to get into a discussion of good people driven to stealing and looting, but morally convenient because the people they're going to attack are already pirates. Okay, convenient. Would you attack nice people? Say you had a nice bunch of Jehovah's Witnesses living in the village or the small town that you've bugged out to, and you've run out of food, or you're running out of food, or you need extra food to escape and go to somewhere even safer. Are you going to attack and kill them? Are you going to shoot them? Kill their 12-year-old kids if they try and defend themselves? You might have to. So again, tomorrow will always be worse than today in SHTF, unless you prep. So prep. So prep to try and keep yourself honourable and decent as far as you can. The goal's going to be to survive. Then the secondary goal is to make a better civilization. This book is great because it does address those deep and concerning moral issues, though in ways I don't always agree with. Toodles!